Hey guys, this is Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space, and I'm here today with Carla from Race to Walk. Say hello, Carla.
Hey, how are you?
And we're here today to talk about The Hunchback of Notre-Dame. We're going to discuss whether Hugo was saying in this book that form and spirit reflect each other, or that you shouldn't trust appearances all the time, because there seems to be evidence for both theories in the text. I think Carla will have some interesting things to say on this. She did a really cool vlog on the Hunchback of Notre-Dame on her channel, which I will link up here. Let's just get started. The Hunchback of Notre-Dame is actually as much about the cathedral of the book as it is about the characters of the book. The Hunchback, the beautiful Esmeralda, the priest. And he wrote the book so that the architecture of Notre Dame and other medieval structures would be saved. And it's likely due to this book that Notre Dame was preserved in its condition before the recent fires. So that's going to play a large part in our discussion. So that's just a little bit of what the book is about. And now I'm just going to ask Carla to explain the theory of form and spirit, which she expressed in her Hunchback blog, which I thought was so interesting. And that was partly what inspired me to really want to read this book, was the fact that she read it and did such an interesting blog about it. So Carla, please share your theories with us.
So I actually, when I started reading The Hunchback, I really didn't even know what the book was about. I had only watched the movie, and it's just almost a completely different story than if you just like watched a Disney movie or something. So when I started reading, I really didn't even know what to expect. But it's kind of interesting to me, just like that, even in the beginning when he was kind of it was almost like a snapshot of society, like it, showing like the hypocrisy of people and just sometimes how shallow people were just in general. Even in that beginning scene, you can see that. And I don't think I was expecting Frollo to be such a main character in the whole arc of the book, because to me it almost seems like it's more of a story of Frollo than it is necessarily about Quasimodo so much. But when there's that middle section where he's talking about the city, and he's talking about this, the place where the wealthy are and these beautiful buildings, and then he's talking about the area of the city where there's the underbelly of the city, and then basically the middle class, and the structures are reflecting the character of the people and how they act and how they behave. For me, and I guess I should have gone back and watched my blog again, but I can't remember exactly what it was that was the kind of the connection to me. But I was reading it, and it was just the sense that the city was the character in the story. And there's this change both in Frollo and Quasimodo in their character, and both of them. But it really kind of connected for me the whole concept of, in Christianity, we're saved by faith, right? And that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. But then there's this whole question of works, like how does that connect in there? And so, when you see debates between like Catholics and Protestants, and especially like Calvinists and, and within the Protestants, there's all this argument about, do works matter? And how do they affect each other? And there was something in that book that just made it click for me that we're tripart beings, we're mind, body, and spirit. And so they're not separate. They affect each other. And so I think the picture of Frollo was really, I think part of it that illustrated it for me the most is that he started out as somebody who was focused on caring for other people. He loved the unlovable. He took Quasimodo in, the one that no one else wanted, that was cast out, and he cared for him, he taught him, he brought him up, he protected him. But then he gets to a point where he not only can he not see the caring for this person that he raised, but even like the beautiful he doesn't even value, like even Esmeralda he doesn't. And the change is, it's that whole section in where he gets into alchemy. It's about control. They want to control nature. They want to control, basically turn things into gold. And it's this focus on this control and this greed. And that's where his focus is. It isn't on other people. It's on what he can manipulate. And that changes him. So he goes from, an admirable person from when he was young to someone who is really horrific. his spirit is what Quasimodo's form is, right? And he doesn't even see it himself. He's just like, he even knows what he's doing is wrong, but he puts the blame on Esmeralda because, he blames her for his own actions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like what we believe isn't a static thing. It's affected by what we do. And that this book really just kind of made it all click for me. It's like, there is this interaction. There's a verse in First Peter, where it talks about, you start with faith, but then you add to it. I should have looked this up, but you add to it, you build on it, you grow in it, and you walk it out. And so if you are just coming in with your faith and you're sitting at the door and you're not turning your focus from, self things, like self-focused things, and you're not, that's why, in Hebrews 12, it says we're supposed to fix our eyes on Jesus. That's where our focus is supposed to be. Then your actions are going to affect your belief. So if salvation is believing, but your actions aren't lining up, your beliefs are going to change. You can't say they're not like, here are my beliefs, here are my actions. There's this intersection between the two. So that for me was this book really kind of illustrated it for me. And I'm still kind of like wrapping my head around it because, I've always been in Protestant churches, and most of them have been Reformed churches. And so it's just like this completely different sort of understanding. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't even see what you're not seeing because you've always been seeing it in a particular way. So I'm still kind of like, kind of researching that out. The Orthodox Church, they have the icons, this picture, this image. And so, it's just, I think maybe that wasn't Hugo's intent, but to me, what it says is that beauty is important. And so when he has these beautiful, beautiful buildings, it's kind of like this lifting of the spirit, this encouraging people to look up and look out and to strive to be that form. To me, it was almost like saying, are these buildings that these people are in and that they're reflecting their character? Are they being shaped by those buildings? You know what I mean? It's like, you know what I'm saying? So if people are surrounded by ugliness, how can they have this aspiring to this beauty if they don't see it around them? Well, I mean, maybe that's just what I got from it. Maybe that's not what he intended. But didn't you say that you had been reading some of his other writings about? I mean, was there anything like that in there?
Mostly what he was saying in what I read, which is the introduction to the play Cromwell, which it wasn't really a big important play for him. But the introduction itself, the preface, was very important as like a romantic manifesto sort of thing. He was like a leader of the romantic movement in France. So in that piece, mostly what he talks about, it's so long. What I'm reading right now, which is like page 4 of 5, it's just a humongous document. He does, in that document, the introduction, he often contrasts the soul versus the beast-like body, or the spirit versus the form. Like he definitely brings out that contrast, and he says that Christianity is the time when we were made aware of that contrast, that it even existed. So definitely in his work, he was portraying some sort of contrast, but also at times he seemed very keen on expressing how they were related. So it's hard to tell sometimes. I couldn't tell ultimately what his theory was, whether form and spirit are supposed to mirror each other or not so much.
The whole thing about the printing press, where he was talking about how that affected, how would you say that? Like it affected the message, or it affected the thought, or how would you put that whole section there about, because he was saying, that architecture used to be like the message of one generation to the next.
Right.
And then he's like going to a printing press, the form impacts the substance, or the spirit of the message, and he was not really, it seemed like he was kind of dismissing even the transitory nature of what the printing press produced. Didn't it say
it did?
Kind of what
he kind of seemed like he was like dismissing the printing press as having much artistic worth as opposed to architecture, which he felt like was being ruined essentially by the printing press. And that's actually one of the arguments for that, the idea that form and spirit reflect each other in the Hunchback of Notre-Dame, is that I think the architecture is the strongest argument for that, because there's just numerous examples where he says that. In the printing press section was one of those sections. He said he hates Renaissance architecture as compared to Gothic architecture, and he wanted to protect Gothic architecture as more valuable because the Renaissance architecture has little concern for the artistic value. It's rather frivolous. I forget if he actually makes the connection between Renaissance architecture and the printing press, but he seems to have a really similar attitude towards the two, because with the printing press, there can just be a flood of carp, as my husband would say, and architecture languishes. That architecture used to be the place where people could express their artistic vision, and now anybody can do it, you know, with the printing press. He feels like the monument of the times was a more valuable medium for expressing the spirit of the times.
Yeah.
Just the fact, though, that he was so heavy on the architecture and how there's a certain spirit that animates architecture throughout this text, and how the settings do mirror the characters very much, like you were saying, like when King Louis stays in the Bastille instead of the Louvre. You know, it's like maybe because he's kind of a bloody character, you know, why would he stay in the prison instead of the Louvre? It just is kind of reflective of his character. And then the alchemist study. Frollo's alchemist study in the book is compared to Rembrandt's etching of Faust. And he is portrayed at that time as sort of losing his soul to the devil. So the setting very much mirrors Frollo's spirit. So it seems like it could just be a writing technique. I know that is a writing technique, that your setting should in some way mirror your characters or vice versa. They should be connected somehow. They should comment on each other. But given the fact that he wrote whole chapters stating the theory that architecture states the spirit of the times, it really seems like that's part of his message overall in the book. One of the other arguments for the idea that form and spirit mirror each other in this book is that he makes this comment about Quasimodo in the beginning. It is certain that the mind becomes atrophied in a defective body. So he's essentially saying because Quasimodo has the defective body, his mind is atrophied. So that seems like a really strong connection between form and spirit.
There's a part like towards the beginning where he's talking about how not only that one, but where he's talking about how his form has affected his character. Like, how could he be anything but this brute with a character like that, or with a form like that? But I think, like, to me, what it says is that there's one doesn't necessarily determine the other, but they intersect with each other.
There's a connection, but it's not determinative.
Yeah, it's, our spirit is made holy, but our soul and our body, it still needs to, there's this process of sanctification. So, it's going one way or it's going the other. How people interact with you, how people treat you, that's going to have an impact on you and on your spirit, like on who you, and also, on who you think you are and how people treat you and respond to you.
Yeah, he could just be saying just that.
What was the younger brother's name?
Jehan.
He had everything. He had the beauty, he had the advantages, but he basically was this depraved person because of his choices and what his self-focus. He was basically a hedonist and, just after like whatever he wanted to do at the time, and was never focused on anyone other than himself, even his brother. I mean, even at Frollo's worst, he still had some consideration for his brother, even though it really wasn't the greatest consideration.
Let's go with the case for against form mirrors spirit. There were several instances that seemed to argue against that. And one of the strongest is that in the beginning, Quasimodo is a very brutish character, both physically and mentally and spiritually, all of it. He's kind of a brute. And he changes, though, in the end, he changes as soon as Esmeralda shows him a little bit of kindness. It's like he's shook. And suddenly he becomes a much more tender-hearted person. And I feel like his love is the only really noble love that is in this story. that's
Yeah.
selfless, completely. He literally lets himself die, after he sees that the two people he loves most in the world have died. So I feel like that is an argument against Formir's spirit in this book, because he's the most brutish looking character, and yet he has the softest, most noble heart by the end.
I think that, like, for me, I think, there's the intersection. They intersect. And so, like, how he looks is affected who he was as a person. But once he had that focus on something else, so he received that kindness, right? So he was receiving that love, and he had an object that he was bestowing that love on. So the form is, the form that he's focusing on is outside of himself. So I think that's that whole thing is like, your personality isn't locked, your character isn't locked, it changes. So we saw that with Frollo, he changes. The same thing happens with Quasimodo, but it was when Quasimodo put his focus on others that his character changed, and he had the opportunity to do that. I don't know, maybe it was forgiveness, her showing forgiveness to him really unlocked that kind of, he was really kind of a prisoner into, what people saw him as. And like when she forgave him, that kind of opened that door so he could,
That's such a good point. Thank you. This is why I wanted you on here. You mentioned Frollo, the priest. That's another argument, the case for not. So the priest, who is supposed to be this authority, along with several other authorities like the judge and like Phoebus, they carry a mantle of authority that makes people expect that these people are going to be on my side and be able to help me. And they totally went against that. Their spirit was not reflective of their form. So I think Carla really brought out a really good point about this book, and that is that form and spirit are interrelated, but they're on a spectrum for each person, because although your form does affect you and your character growth throughout your life, that can change. Ultimately, your form and your spirit do not always intersect and look the same. And I don't think Hugo is saying that they do. I think he portrays character change, and this takes place in such a short time that Quasimodo, he doesn't change the way he looks one bit, but he changes wildly from brute to noble-hearted, self-sacrificial, loving person within the course of a few months. So that's a pretty dramatic change, and I think Carla is right in saying that Hugo was not on either end of the spectrum. That is it for our discussion today, guys. Thank you so much, Carla, for offering your input here. I think that it did bring me to another place about how I was thinking about this book, because I really wasn't sure what Hugo was saying in that regard. At times it seemed so harshly in one direction that I just couldn't really make up my mind. But now I feel better about it. Thank you so much, Carla. I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion. You should definitely go check out your channel if you haven't yet. She's always posting about books and Bible studies and apologetics, and there's just a whole world of content over there. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments any thoughts that you have if you've read this book and if this discussion sparked anything for you. Thanks so much, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Yeah.